This video is brought to you by Skillshare. Around the end of last year, I came to the realization that I've been neglecting my art skills quite a bit. I get distracted quite often, and I go into tangents and side arcs of trying to learn how to leatherwork, or sculpt, or how to use Blender. And while those expeditions into creative side hobbies are extremely fulfilling and so much fun and some of my favorite things to do ever, my first love and most passionate love is and forever probably will be visual character illustration. And to improve on some of those things, one of the necessary components is truly just mileage, doing the dang thing, practicing enough, which is one of the reasons why I've been focusing more on doing like actual full illustrations this year. So when in need of subject matter, of things to draw just for the sake of practicing drawing cool things, what better subject matter could I ask for than my audience's character designs? Last month, I was just in the mood to draw one week and really just create some cool, full character illustration. This was kind of my beginning of embarking into a journey of like, let's work on this a little bit more. Let's just get in there and actually make something. And you guys seem to really enjoy that video, and so did I. It was probably my favorite video that I made last month, so of course I'm going to do it again. I know some of you guys are invested in this video series because you would like me to draw your characters, which is something that I do want to do. I want to open up submissions to my like broader YouTube audience. But since I only got to choose 3 submissions from different people last time I did this video, I want to choose this week's submissions from that same first batch just to give more people more opportunity. I saw so many other cool character designs that I also wanted to have a crack at and maybe come up with cool illustrations for. So I think it's only fitting that I give that batch one more go before moving on and opening up submissions again.
Normally at this point in the video, I would go through submissions on camera, but I was running a little bit low on time this week, and I did not end up getting reaction footage to the submissions I ended up choosing for this video. I found these off camera, and I ended up getting good ideas, so I just went with these. I promise the submission reactions will be back next time I make a Drawing Your OCs video, but this week I decided to go with Nyx, who was submitted by I Can Be Louder on Instagram, and Mocha Bean, who was submitted by Jamie. I'm gonna get into the art process in just a minute here.
But first, a big part of keeping my creativity and technical skills fresh is by doing as much personal work and study as I can behind the scenes, and my favorite place to do that is on paper in a sketchbook. And if you didn't catch it, last month I collaborated with this video sponsor Skillshare to create my very first Skillshare class, Sketchbook Regularly, Create Character-Driven Colorful Spreads. In this class, I discuss a lot of my regular sketchbooking and study habits, what keeps me inspired and feeling fresh to avoid burnout, how I make the studying process more fun, and through the class we create a 2-page sketchbook spread together using those techniques. One of the most common questions I get is how I avoid art block, burnout, and how I stay inspired week to week, and my sketchbook habit is a big part of that process. It has been a blast checking up on the class every so often and seeing all of the cool new spreads in the class project section. So if you want to begin your own sketchbook habit or just try to keep up with it a little bit more, my class is a great jumping off point. But if there are other skills you've been wanting to grow, Skillshare has you covered there too. As the world's largest online learning community for creatives, they have classes taught by industry professionals in pretty much every creative category you can think of, like illustration, animation, film and video, music production, crochet and crafting, productivity and freelancing, and countless more. They have a great catalog of other classes focusing on sketchbooking and traditional illustration if you want to check out others after taking mine, and you can level up your skills even faster by checking out their learning paths. Their sequential class collections intended to be taken in order to build on a specific topic to help you gain understanding quickly, and as someone who's foolishly interested in starting a 3D animation arc, yes, in complete conflict with what I was talking about at the beginning of the video, I'm itching to check out master 3D animation using Blender and Maya, and build 3D models and animations with Blender. So if you too would like to foolishly begin your next skill tree side quest, even though your main quest is nowhere close to being resolved, you can check out my class or any other class on Skillshare for free, because the first 500 people to use the link in my description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Thank you so much to Skillshare for sponsoring this video and for collaborating with me on my first class. Now let's get back to it.
First up, we have Nyx, who was submitted by I Can Be Louder. I immediately fell in love with this character design whenever I first saw him. I just love all of the maximalism. I love like the very decisive color palette. I love all of the jewelry and the scars and the dragon of it all. It's just like a very Kira core original character. So of course I had to draw this one. I Can Be Louder's email about the character says, a prince, a king, a magician, a god, Nyx is painstakingly human compared to his fateful reputation, woven into a mask of legend by years of suffering and wild tales to tell. With himself as his worst enemy and a burning belief in benevolence and the power of mercy, he can almost convince the world around him of his invincibility, but there's no point in mistaking him for anything other than a force to be reckoned with. Nyx is part of a story called The Recovery of the Moon that takes place on an isolated island where a millennia-old magical entity has been imprisoned under the earth. Over the centuries, this has affected people that live there, resulting in seemingly random occurrences of magic, either of a dark and shadowy kind or an explosive and burning kind. As time passed and wars raged on, two powerful nations crystallized out of the bloodshed. Solus, the Kingdom of Fire, in the east, and Skath, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, the Shadow Realm, brutally led by the Kavalon dynasty, whose youngest heir is nobody else than Nyx himself. Nyx is an outcast that is despised by his family for his immense magical power and seen as a humanoid bad omen by his people. When he finds the love of his life in a rebel from the opposite side of the island, he, for the first time, has something worth fighting for. The story follows Nyx's uprising against his parents and ultimately his fight against the tyranny of his family line. When he teams up with his lover and the rest of the magical curses that gravitate towards the duo, like the tides by the moon, he slowly uncovers the secrets of the island itself and the magical entity that breathes underneath their feet. And that might just pull their every action like puppets on a string. So based on that whole description and the reference sheets, which by the way are very thorough and once again putting me to shame, I wanted to do more of like a portrait type illustration for this character. I think an action pose thing would also be really cool, but I just want to kind of focus in on his face and sort of like the emotions that are going on, and the general like concept that I wanted to go for this illustration was like a very heavy as the crown type of vibe. Due to the powers this character has, I feel like he has like a lot of personal responsibility, and like there's also probably a lot of duality going on to this character because he can turn into like this giant dragon monster thing due to his magical abilities, but he also has this like unyielding devotion to mercy and like the greater good. So I actually did this first rough sketch whenever I initially did my first Drawing Your OCs video, and I just didn't end up having time to do this one all the way, but I did want to follow back up on it because I had a lot of fun with the composition and everything. So the general vibe is like a profile style illustration, almost like a royal portrait. Then I wanted to have like his monster form sort of looming above him, like the shadowy bloodline that he comes from. Since the email mentions that his worst enemy is himself, I kind of wanted to get that across in the composition a little bit, like this benevolent ruler king whose face has sort of got that like halo around it like you would see in like old religious paintings and that sort of thing, but with this like dragon looming over top of him, like this part of his legacy that he can't really escape, and it's just sort of part of him whether he likes that or not. And also I just thought this was a cool compositional framing element. I love dragon type characters, like a character that has some kind of a relationship with a dragon, whether they like fly on a dragon or turn into a dragon. I just love a portrait with a character and their dragon, so that's also basically what I was going for here. And it also gave me an opportunity to practice drawing dragons, because in the first draft of this sketch, the dragon looked terrible, and as I was refining it, I was really trying to like nail down a good vibe for this dragon, because it's not something that I'm typically very good at drawing, but I think I actually arrived in like a pretty nice place. As you could see at the beginning of this illustration process, I am trying to be way more intentional about like what direction I want to bring the colors and the lighting and the values in by doing like that value study at the very beginning of an illustration process. For whatever reason, in the past, I just really didn't do a whole lot of like thumbnails or drafts where I would pay attention to that sort of thing. I would kind of just like wing it whenever I was actually working on the illustration, and unsurprisingly, that led to a lot of illustrations that lacked direction, lacked intentional use of color, and I would just kind of get stuck at certain points with certain illustrations because I just didn't know exactly what to do with them. And I've also acknowledged in the past couple of videos I've uploaded that for whatever reason, values are still a big struggle for me and a bit of a struggle in my art process overall. So by doing that little loose value study at the beginning of the process, I can kind of like nail that down ahead of time before going into the colors and have like a plan. Even though I still struggle with color and value and that sort of thing, at least I've got like some kind of a plan going in so that I'm not just throwing a Hail Mary on the rendering at the very end of the illustration process, not knowing what the heck to do. But I really loved the like value composition that I did at the beginning of this illustration. I really liked silhouetting the two figures figures and having them really vignetted in this like dark, shadowy lighting, because I feel like that's very representative of this character's storyline and personality, but then having a little bit of light just fall on his face and blade and some of his jewelry, just to like show, I guess, his inner good. Something else I've really been trying to do specifically with these videos, specifically with full illustrations that I've been working on in general, is working on my storytelling abilities and trying to actually use visual communication in my art a little bit more, because it's something that I really love to do, but it's also something I consider to be a weak point of mine a little bit. It's been really long since I worked on a comic or any kind of narrative art. I also don't love working on comics or things that are more sequential because they just take so long to do. I love just a still illustration, so I'm really trying to work on utilizing all of the storytelling visual devices that I can in one single image, because that's really what I love to do. Maybe outside of like animation, but that's its own whole like masochistic side issue. I don't know why I like that more than I like comics, but I'm weird like that. A couple of other things I was trying to work on during the process of this illustration was just sort of likeness and overall character structure. For some reason, this side pose was really difficult for me to draw well. Usually I don't struggle too much with that, but I guess I was also trying to angle him in such a way where you could still see the corset and a lot of the details on that and his necklaces and his blouse. So near the beginning, I ended up redrawing his torso and hands and everything several times in order to try to like make that look right. The cane with a little dragon head on it also gave me so much trouble. It looked so stupid in the original sketch. Like, for whatever reason, drawing a full detailed dragon head is easier than drawing that little like staff. It doesn't make any sense, but it was a thing. I was also trying to work on my line art a little bit here, maybe make it like a little thinner so that it would disappear more into my work and let me paint and shade a little bit more, because the line quality and line weight in my art is not super prominent. It's not super important. Like, I care a lot more about shading and painting the forms than I do like having stylized lines, so I'm trying to make them a little bit more subtle. The middle part of the process overall went pretty smoothly, like trying to make the values match up okay to my little value study at the beginning and trying to get the colors to look nice and just kind of layering multiply layers and shading and everything. That was pretty straightforward. I leaned a lot into anime style cell shading for this portrait just because I feel like this guy is such an anime protagonist. I had to a little bit. I had to make him look at least a little bit like anime vampire pretty boy, because if I'm gonna draw a man, that's the kind of man that I'm probably gonna draw. Weirdly enough, in this illustration, once I got past the flats phase, like flat coloring, shading, adding in jewelry, and basically the setup for me to go and render and paint the way I normally do, that is when I started to struggle a little bit, and a lot of the things that I was trying to do just were not fitting my vision for the illustration. This is usually the part of an illustration that I am the most comfortable with because it's finishing touches, it's going in and like just changing things. It's very intuitive for me most of the time, and a lot of it's just like lighting, rendering, making things look tasty and juicy and delicious. But for this, whenever I was painting it, I found that I was losing the likeness a lot that I was trying to go for, and I just like wasn't happy with the face. I wasn't happy with how the hair was coming out. The lighting situation that I had planned was too subtle to do any of the bold lighting choices that I usually go with, besides some like backlighting and rim light. It was sort of something I went back on many times and then changed and tweaked, and I discarded layers, and then eventually I also tried just adding more color to the illustration in general because things were looking quite gray. I was really struggling trying to add light across his face without it looking unnaturally saturated, but I was also trying to make it more of like a focal point and direct most of the color to that area. At one point near the end, I found like the overall colors in the illustration to just be really washed out and really lacking, so I even experimented a little bit with adding like a warm fire background and introducing a lot more orange into the piece. I messed around with a couple of different gradient maps to try to do that, and also messed around with just some color layers to try to go in and directly tweak some of that, but I was once again just still really not happy with it. I was definitely pretty stuck near the end, so I actually ended up sending a screenshot of this to a friend of mine, and they said, hey, maybe just like add a little bit more saturation to all of the gold jewelry that he's wearing so that you can introduce some more warm tones into the piece, and then try to like balance everything else out from there. So I did end up trying that because I really wanted some warmth in there, but I wanted to use it a lot less than like all of the blue cool tones. So I ended up doing that, and then also added a lot more glow to the piece to try to direct your attention more to the character's face and to the dragon, and I think that that worked really well and kind of solved some of the compositional issues that I was having. And I finally went in again at the end and tried painting the face and a couple of the things the way I normally do, and it was working way better this time. I kept a lot of elements in the paint over pretty subtle compared to how I usually go about things, because I really wanted this piece to have kind of cold, solemn tones, but also a dreamy atmosphere at the same time. And I think in the end, after a lot of like tweaking and indecisiveness, I was able to ultimately capture the mood that I was going for at the beginning of the piece, which I was very, very happy about. And in the end, I also feel like this piece gives off major like anime light novel book cover vibes, which I'm pretty happy with. I feel like that's more or less what I was going for. Anyways, I had so much fun drawing Nyx here. I think that he is the coolest, and thank you so much for sending him in, Josie. Next up, we have Mocha Beans, submitted by Jamie, and I just really love this character's design. I think she was really, really cute, and I was definitely in the mood to draw a witch whenever I chose her. I was really vibing with the pastel color palette, and I just really love the green and purple going on. Anyways, Jamie wrote in their email about Mocha. She is a potion-loving witch from a high fantasy world with dragons, magic, and mythical creatures. She's part of a mage society, and she's on an adventure team. She fights using potions, but specifically she disperses the potions through bubbles. Like her bubble potion, she's a bubbly person whose positive energy and smile brightens up the room. She's got a lot of energy and love and a passion for experimenting with new potions. Jamie also included a reference image of Mocha using her potion bubbles in the email, and that is basically what inspired me to do the illustration for this character, because I just thought that idea was so cute, and the art of her using her bubble potions is absolutely adorable. So for this illustration, the vibe that I wanted to go for was very, very straightforward. I was just in the mood to draw like an anime girl style character, and I think Mocha was a perfect fit for that. So starting out working on this sketch, I didn't have like an exact premise in mind. I just wanted to start out drawing like a cool sort of dynamic looking pose of Mocha casting a spell to maybe like disperse her bubble potions. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but I feel like having some kind of gesture to show what the character is doing is just like a good premise for this type of illustration. While I was working on this general composition, I kind of had bubbles going around her, and I had the idea like it would be cute if she was like trying to catch something inside one of her bubbles. I just feel like that's something that there's like a clear line you can draw between those two things. And I thought, what if she's just down in a swamp somewhere trying to catch some frogs inside of some bubbles? In my mind, it was just like the green color palettes connecting, and I just thought it would look like very cottagecore, witchy, and adorable. And I was also just in the mood to draw some silly frogs. It was also really funny because whenever I was doing like the initial thumbnail where I was sketching out the frogs for this, I was on the phone with my partner just laughing maniacally every few seconds because of how stupid the frogs looked. And I had way too much fun drawing out these ridiculous expressions for the frogs. I don't draw frogs enough. They're just absolutely ridiculous and delightful. I need to do more of this. Anyways, like the process for the first illustration that I did, I once again went in and did like a value study next to figure out what I wanted the lighting to be. And the other idea I had for this was to have like sort of an enchanted glowing swamp. Like maybe these are magical frogs that she's trying to get to use like, I don't know, frog spit for a potion spell or something, and she's trying to catch them with her bubbles. So I kind of wanted the frogs to be in bioluminescent water and maybe even look a little bioluminescent themselves. So I wanted to have like the water and the bubbles beneath as kind of a light source, and try to make the lighting as cool and dynamic as possible, and just sort of have like a forest behind her. I also, because I'm not like really skilled enough to do this perspective properly, I was trying to kind of cheat the perspective to do a bit of like a warped fisheye style thing on the end here so that you can see some of the water from beneath. This is definitely like a big cheat. It is a big stretch, and in the end I don't think it really like worked out properly. I think the better move would have been to just like tilt the composition in general and have the character also like at a tilted angle so that I could see like the bottom, but it's done now. I'm not gonna go back and redo it, but I have taken notes on how I could like better accomplish this since I'm not like proficient at a warped lens perspective. There's no way I was doing that for this. Anyways, because I cheated the perspective so heavily and was trying to go for like a really wild angle here, whenever I was trying to refine the sketch, since I was so loose at the beginning, I had a lot of struggles trying to like make it look right, and I did several passes trying to fix things and make everything still make sense whenever I flipped my canvas. And I also have her in like a real deep lunge trying to like, I don't know, reach the frog or something. I was just trying to generally go for a dynamic pose, and I don't know how successful I was, especially since the legs are like, there's some weirdness happening. But I think at the end, once again, I cheated it in a way that made a decent amount of sense. And I did a lot of canvas flipping, and it looked sort of okay whenever I flipped my canvas. So I eventually just went in and I started inking, and I just started having fun. On this illustration, I was also going to originally go in with like a completely different brush than I usually use to ink it, to try to do like more of a graphical line art style, but I think I was inking this like at maybe 2 a.m. So I just did not have the mental fidelity to pull that off. And I also realized quickly that like I wouldn't have wanted to like render it in that style anyway, so I kind of just used my usual G pen line art, and I tried to make it once again sort of thinner than my usual style, but still sort of anime. I think the line art shading vibe I was trying to go for with this is once again sort of like anime watercolor illustration vibes, but if you did that digital, I don't know, I think it turned out okay. I also in the course of this had a lot of trouble trying to draw an anime face, since I have been drawing so many like more semi-realistic style faces recently, and I think I in the end did end up making her a little bit more semi-realism looking, but I still tried to give her that anime vibe. I don't know. In the end, I tried my best. Anyways, once again, the shading and the colors on this gave me like a ton of problems, because I was trying to go in a very specific direction with the color palette, and I had it in my mind's eye whenever I was doing the grayscale thumbnail version. But unfortunately, that doesn't always directly translate whenever you're trying to put actual colors down, and you have to deal with like saturation as a factor, which is still not something that I've been able to like entirely wrap my head around. So this illustration had a frankly ungodly amount of layers involved in it, and it quickly became just like chaos hell. I really need to maybe tweak my process a little bit to be more of like a few layers instead of several different folders full of like 20 layers. I do like the ability to kind of like tweak things and go back and work with layers that are like brightness and contrast and gradient maps and that sort of thing, but I think that that definitely became a little bit of a crutch in this illustration, and it might have been easier to just like merge things in the end. But after a lot of tweaking and repeatedly checking the value like over and over and over again, I think I did end up in a good place with some of the coloration. The fact that this character's color palette was so pastel, and I was going for more of like a, I don't know if vibrant is the word, but I was going for a very colorful like animation splash image type vibe with this illustration. So I did have to like kind of tweak and alter the actual colors of the character's outfit a little bit to make them fit my color palette a little bit more. Kind of made them look a little bit more saturated than I think they actually would be, which in the end I think is okay. I also had to repeatedly go into the background and fix the values and make sure the character was standing apart from the background enough. I was also sort of trying to use a specific like color harmony for this, and I don't even know exactly what it is, but I found a couple of example illustrations on Pinterest that had sort of like a blue, purple, magenta, green color harmony going on, and maybe there's like a little bit of yellow involved as well. I'm not sure exactly what that is or what it would be called, but I was trying to use it here to balance everything out, and it was really, really hard. In the end, I still don't know if I'm entirely happy with it. I think the colors ended up turning out pretty decent, but I do think the saturation and vibrancy of the frogs sort of takes away from like looking at the character's face a little bit. It also doesn't help that I once again used the golden ratio for this illustration. It's not subtle at all, but I also have the golden ratio flowing towards the frog. I should have had the composition flowing more towards the character's face. That's my bad. I usually wing things whenever I'm drawing and follow my own like intuition so much that using actual like art fundamental rules is making me feel a little bit like a fish out of water here, but I was trying some things. I was trying to make things interesting and like weird, and I don't know how successful I was, but I had a lot of fun doing it, so I think that probably makes up for things a little bit. Anyways, towards the end of the illustration, a lot of it was about like trying to figure out white balance and make like the star sparkle thing she's using to cast her spell like the brightest point in the illustration, and try not to make too many other things compete with that. I was also trying to make sure the bubbles made more sense and weren't too busy. Again, not sure if I was like entirely successful with that, but I was trying to go for a vibe. I also added some plants in the foreground just to once again have a framing element and just make it look more like she's in a forest. And finally, I also had a paint over layer on top of everything, and I was going in with, I think, basically just the hard G pen and painting over a couple of things to make the hair more expressive and like tweak values and colors and saturation in a couple of places, and just like generally clean things up a little bit in a couple of places where I didn't like how some of the shapes looked. I think that worked a lot better on this illustration versus the previous one, and in the end, I don't know if I'm entirely happy with the composition as a whole, but I am really happy with like how the character herself looks. Like, I think her gesture and expression and how she stands out from the background works really well for this piece. It sort of captures that whimsical, witchy, sort of anime/comic illustration vibe that I was going for this piece, and I think it was a somewhat successful experimentation with like this type of color palette. I still have a lot of work to do on this stuff overall, but it's always just so much fun to experiment with like illustrations that I maybe wouldn't ordinarily do, and that's why doing like illustrations of your characters is so much fun. I definitely would not have ended up with an illustration like this on my own, and I'm so glad that I was able to do it. So thank you, Jamie, for sending in Mocha Bean. I think she's very, very cute, and I hope you like how the illustration came out. And with that, hello and welcome to the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed this installment with the art process and the general thoughts and what I came up with, even though it was a shorter video, even though I did fewer submissions than I wanted to get to this week. I just ended up running into some time constraints and some art block and some hits to my schedule, but I will definitely get to more submissions than this next time I do a Drawing Your OCs video, which will probably be very, very soon because I actually have like a couple of other like character illustration drafts sitting in my art folder as we speak. I think I originally had 4 planned out for this video, but unfortunately that didn't happen. But it was fun to kind of just focus on these 2 characters and these 2 illustrations and sort of pour all of my energy into the 2 of these for this particular video. It can get a little overwhelming otherwise to do like so many illustrations and try to like get everything done in just like basically 1 week. So thank you for being patient with me whenever I don't have the time for that much content, but hopefully next time I will. I absolutely love doing these videos. It's just such a blast. I've been really into practicing my full illustration skills recently, and something about drawing your characters and having like the freedom to like have a little blurb about them, but then imagine like a scenario and a scene for myself by having limited context is just, it's a lot of fun to do, and it's really fun to share those with you guys and see your reactions. So thank you so much once again to all the people who originally submitted to that batch. I'm definitely drawing at least a couple more characters from that batch before I open up general submissions because there's just too many good ones in there. I cannot, in good conscience, move on from some of those characters without actually executing my drawing ideas. They're in my brain and they have to come out. Anyways, if you want to see more of those videos, definitely subscribe to the channel. I'm hoping to have one out towards the front end of March. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Definitely check out my Skillshare class if that's something you're interested in as well. But as always, the biggest thank you for this video and every single one of my videos goes to my patrons and especially my executive producers. Miss Furnace, Koichucks, Becca, Mandolin, Cyrus Orion, Jenny Craftsma, Molly Fanton, Optimus Prime, I Do TKD, Ren, Band Off the Yellow, Cloud Max, Marita Wasner, Velly Smelly, Stabby Horse, Holding Space for Me That Espresso, Ember Creeps, Cardia X, Christina Kimtia Art, Call Me Ash, Lumira, Fiasco, Mossy Raven, A Ruler, Ha Get It, I'm not saying that name on the internet, ABW Makes, Icegavan, A Wendu, Liana, Ermler Jean, Brian, Phoenix, PNG Not Found, Freedom and Gus Gus, Kat, Dodo, Zyle S, Agent Sketchy, Thea Maia, Lovisa, Eloquent Silence, Hypnos, Katie, Sweet Winter Garden, Gravity Drop, I Hang Out with Cats at Parties, and Bean the Bread.